Burn it all! The scream cracked across the town square like a rifle shot, snapping heads toward the flame. A young man, early 20s, wild-eyed, flushed with sweat and fury, shoved a faded military jacket into a roaring barrel of fire. His voice, sharp and ragged, echoed off the brick buildings like an accusation. This is what your kind stood for? Blood, war, control? Burn it! The flames surged upward, hungry and yellow, devouring olive-drab sleeves and time-worn patches that had once meant something. A low hiss rose as a brass button cracked in the heat. The jacket curled inward like a dying leaf. Across from the barrel, the man it belonged to stood without a word. His name wasn't known to the crowd yet, just his posture, straight-backed, unmoving. He looked older than the bricks underfoot, his face weathered, his fists curled tight at his sides. The heat from the fire licked toward him, but he didn't flinch. The protester turned on him. You proud of this, huh? You wear that thing like it makes you holy, like it gives you the right to walk around like we owe you something. More phones came out. A few snickers rose from the gathering. Others just watched, unsure, too stunned to move. The smell of burnt fabric filled the air, along with something older, something like gunpowder and rain. The old man didn't respond. He didn't have to. His silence was louder than the shouting. And 20 yards away, where the sidewalk ended near the flagpole, 8 Marines in full dress uniform had stopped mid-step. They said nothing. But one by one, they began to turn. If you believe every veteran deserves respect, please subscribe, because every view helps this message reach those who need it most. His name was Norman Keegan, 84 years old, former Master Gunnery Sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. Most didn't know that. To them, he was just the old man with the scuffed boots and the worn leather cane who sat at the far bench every morning, facing the flag like it was still roll call. He didn't speak much. He didn't smile often. But he came. Same time, same spot. Without fail. Always in the same routine. Always in that jacket. That jacket wasn't just fabric. It was memory, mended a dozen times by a wife long buried, stained with the sweat of countries whose names were only remembered by the ghosts who served in them. Most mornings, Norman arrived before the pigeons stirred. He'd make the slow walk from his apartment 5 blocks away, a small, dim place above a closed-down shoe repair shop. The locals called him Sergeant Norm, half respectfully, half dismissively. Most never asked what he'd done, only that he walked like something inside him still followed orders. His jacket, even in summer heat, was always on him or folded across his lap. Not out of vanity, out of reverence. Like some men carry Bibles. He kept a handkerchief in his left breast pocket, clean, creased. His boots were black and dull, not polished for shine, but worn smooth from decades of marching, drilling, standing still in impossible places. And today, like every other day, Norman had come to sit at the far bench beside the old memorial stone, where the names had faded, but the cold granite never changed. But today, his bench was already taken. He hadn't noticed the crowd at first. The commotion was still small when he turned the corner. His eyes, clouded with time but still sharp at the edges, caught movement by the flame barrel. He stopped walking, just for a moment. Someone was speaking too loud, angrily. A familiar olive-drab fabric flashed in the wind, high above a pair of shaking hands. Norman's pace didn't change. If anything, it slowed. He approached, as if drawn by instinct, not by curiosity but by duty, as if something in his bones told him to witness it, no matter what it was. The fire popped as he stepped into the edge of the crowd. A child cried out at the sound. A woman near the front looked away. In the heat of the flame, the jacket, his jacket, was already folding inward, the collar blackening. The patches were unreadable now, their meaning scorched into silence. Norman said nothing. He didn't reach out. Not yet. He stepped closer, step by deliberate step, past the faces that parted without thinking. His cane clicked once on the pavement, then again, then stopped. The protester hadn't seen him yet, but Norman saw everything. The jacket, The fire, the young man's fists, the smirks behind phone screens, and the bench, his bench, now empty, but for the ashes falling on it like snow. He did not blink. He did not sigh. But the breath he took next was full of something heavier than smoke. He reached down and picked up a single brass button from the ground, still warm. Norman Keegan didn't bend as he reached down. He knelt, slow, deliberate. A lifetime of discipline still guided the way his body moved, even as the bones beneath groaned in protest. His hand hovered just above the cracked stone path, fingers trembling as they closed around something small. A brass button, scorched black around the rim, warm to the touch. It had broken free when the fire took the left cuff. Norman closed his fingers around it like it was a coin from a wishing fountain, as if it still held something sacred. He straightened, one palm on his cane, the other still clutching the button. No one helped him. No one offered. He turned slowly toward the bench, or what was left of it. The fire had not reached the wood, but the wind had carried its ash there. Dust settled on the iron armrest like old gunpowder, gray and silent. A teenager near the edge of the crowd laughed under his breath. "Look at this one. Takes 10 minutes just to stand up." Another voice, nasal, amused, muttered, "Probably still thinks he's in Saigon." The comment wasn't meant for Norman to hear, but he did. He said nothing. Instead, he reached into his back pocket, pulled out his handkerchief, and began brushing the ash gently off the bench with slow, circular strokes. Each motion was precise, as if scrubbing a gravestone, as if the act of cleaning was a ritual no one else could understand. Behind him, the protester had stepped back from the barrel, breathing heavily. His rant had turned inward now, pacing, muttering, agitated, like the flame hadn't cleansed what he'd hoped it would. Norman sat down, slowly. Not from weakness, from deliberation. His spine remained upright, shoulders squared, hands resting on the knob of his cane. The brass button sat on the bench beside him, glowing faintly in the morning sun. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked straight ahead, not at the flag, but at the horizon just above it. A few people were still recording. One man, suited and sipping coffee, lowered his phone and whispered to the woman beside him, "Is he always like this?" She shrugged. "Comes every morning. Like clockwork." "He ever talk?" "Not once." More ash drifted down from the barrel. A small gust blew it toward Norman's lap. He didn't move. Let it fall. 2 children played on the far side of the square, oblivious. Their laughter rang out, sharp against the weight in the air. And still Norman sat, silent, eyes forward, his breath slow, his hands still. It was the kind of stillness that made people uncomfortable, the kind of stillness that reminded others they'd never been tested the way he had. The protester, noticing the man again, took a step toward him. He stared at Norman's face, then down at the bench, then at the button. Something in his expression tightened, but he said nothing, and no one stood. Not yet. The crowd hadn't thinned. It had shifted, closer now. Faces rearranged like curious bystanders in a courtroom. Some bored, some cautious, some hungry for something they couldn't name. The fire was still alive, but quieter, its hunger satisfied, for now. The protester paced a few feet from the barrel, circling the space with restless energy. He wasn't shouting anymore, but his silence was louder than before, like a storm circling back. He glanced again at Norman, saw him still there, sitting, calm as ever, unmoved, ash in his lap. That unblinking stare, it clearly irritated him. The young man's fists clenched. He turned abruptly, reached toward the bench without warning, and snatched the burned remains of the jacket from beside Norman. The fabric still smoldering faintly. A ripple passed through the crowd. A few gasped. Others leaned forward. Norman did not move. The protester held the ruined jacket in both hands, lifting it like a dirty rag. Threads dangled. The left sleeve had vanished. One of the shoulder patches, blackened but still legible, bore the faded word, Marines. He laughed. once. Bitter. "This," he said, turning to the crowd, "this is a symbol of violence and ignorance. You think it's sacred because it's old? Because someone bled in it?" He looked back at Norman. "This trash ends now." Norman's voice came low, even. "That jacket's older than you are." The protester sneered. "Exactly." With a sharp motion, he threw it back into the barrel. A rush of flame. The cloth caught immediately, surrendering the last of its history to the fire. A sharp hiss escaped as melted nylon curled. For a moment, there was silence. Then, laughter. Scattered, uneasy. A man near the back clapped twice, awkwardly. Someone else tried to join him but stopped halfway. The flame popped again. A button burst. Across the square, a woman, older, maybe in her 70s, stepped forward. Thin white hair tied back with a navy ribbon, voice quiet but clear. "That man," she said, pointing to Norman, "saved my brother in 1968. Carried him on his back 3 miles through jungle under fire." The protester turned to her, expression tightening. "Yeah, and how many did he kill to get there?" She blinked. Once. Took a breath. Stepped back without a word. The protester looked at the crowd again. "You think that jacket makes him noble? It just makes him old." He turned to Norman, eyes searching for a reaction. Anger, shame, anything. But Norman only looked back at him, unblinking, not defiant, unmoved. That silence was starting to spread. The laughter, already fading, died completely. Some phones were lowered. A child in the front row reached up to his father, whispering something the camera didn't catch. Norman shifted slightly in his seat, not away, toward the flame. The protester blinked. His jaw moved, but no sound came out. Norman shifted on the bench, just slightly, just enough to lean forward. His spine did not round. His shoulders did not sag. Instead, he reached down with one slow, practiced hand and began to brush the fresh ash from his slacks with gentle downward strokes. The air smelled of burnt canvas and old memories, the kind of scent that could stick to skin for days, the kind that followed you into dreams. His hand trembled, yes, but not from fear. His fingers moved like someone folding a flag, controlled, reverent. Every motion carried decades of discipline. He did not look at the barrel. He did not look at the crowd. He looked at the ground beneath his boots. Cracked stone, dark with scorch marks now. His left heel pivoted half an inch, instinctively seeking balance, just as it once had on jungle trails slick with rain and blood. "Say something, old man!" the protester barked. Norman didn't. The man stepped closer, towering above him now. The smoke curled between them like a ghost, blurring the space. The flames crackled behind the protester's shoulder, casting his face in flickering red. "Say you're sorry. Say you were wrong." Norman looked up, just slightly. Not all the way, just enough to meet the younger man's eyes. Not with rage, not with grief, with gravity. "I buried better men in that jacket than you'll ever know," he said, voice flat and steady. "And none of them would have burned yours." The words did not shout. They didn't rise above the air, but they landed. Heavy, final, like the last note in a funeral hymn. The protester didn't move. His mouth opened for a reply, but no words came. Norman turned back toward the horizon. He adjusted the cuff of his sleeve. A simple act, but done with such quiet precision that it felt sacred. The white of his undershirt was yellowed with time, but neatly pressed. The buttons were mismatched, stitched by hand. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small rectangle. Not a wallet, but a laminated photo, worn, curled at the corners. A black and white image of 5 men sitting on a crate, rifles balanced on their knees, grinning despite the heat. Norman looked at the photo only briefly, then tucked it back in. He hadn't needed to see their faces. He already remembered them. A voice whispered near the front of the crowd. "He's not flinching." No one responded. The child who had tugged on his father's sleeve now held his hand tightly, watching Norman with wide, unblinking eyes. Even the barrel seemed quieter now, its hunger easing into embers. And across the square, a man in uniform had stopped moving. He stood still in the sun, a styrofoam cup in one hand, untouched. The ribbons on his chest caught the breeze. His eyes were locked on Norman, unblinking. He had been watching for a while. He wasn't alone. The pigeons on the roof had scattered 10 minutes ago, startled by the shouts. Now they hovered in distant perches, watching from above, still, like the rest of the square. The crowd had thinned by inches, not numbers, but by sound. No more clapping, no more laughing, just a low murmur, carried by the wind. At the far end of the plaza, where the granite path met the edge of the war memorial, a small group of Marines in full dress stood in the shade of a white oak. There had been 8 of them. Now only 7 remained in place. The 8th had stepped forward. He was tall, maybe early 30s, his posture exact, every ribbon on his chest polished and silent. He held a coffee cup in one hand, the other resting at his side. It had gone cold long ago. Staff Sergeant Miguel Harlow hadn't spoken. He hadn't even blinked much. But from the moment the jacket hit the fire, his attention had narrowed like a scope. His brothers beside him shifted slightly. One leaned in and said something, a quiet question, but Harlow didn't answer. He just stared, his jaw flexed. Not in anger, in recognition. He knew that jacket. Not that exact one, perhaps, but that type, that weight, the kind that clung to your back through monsoons, or made you carry the smell of fuel and death long after the war had passed. His gaze wasn't on the protester. It was on Norman, on the way he sat, unmoved, on the way his hands rested, not limp, but composed, the way he brushed ash off his lap with slow fingers, like they still belonged to the core. Harlow saw it. He had seen that kind of quiet before, the stillness of men who had buried brothers without a flag, who had stood at too many ceremonies with no one left to call home, who had served, then watched the world forget. And something inside him shifted. He lowered the coffee to the stone ledge beside the tree, took a long breath, then turned to the others behind him, his fellow Marines, still standing in formation from the earlier honor guard ceremony nearby. They didn't need words. One met his eyes, then another, then a third, each one following Harlow's line of sight to the bench, to the old man, to the fire. No nods, no commands, just awareness. And slowly, one by one, they began to move. Boots on stone, no cadence, no clatter, just soft, purposeful steps toward the edge of the crowd. The protester didn't notice. Not yet. He was pacing again, not ranting now, but uncertain, like the adrenaline was fading and something heavier was taking its place. But others noticed. Heads turned. Whispers started. A man near the front muttered, "Wait. They're coming this way." And at the center of it all, Norman Keegan remained exactly as he had been, seated, upright, silent, as 8 Marines in dress blues walked toward him without saying a single word. They moved with the kind of precision that needed no rehearsal. 8 Marines, shoulders squared and boots silent, crossed the open square with the measured ease of men who'd stood guard over flag-draped caskets and carved their grief into discipline. They didn't rush. They didn't scan the crowd. Their eyes were fixed on one thing, the bench. A murmur swept through the onlookers, subtle but rising, like wind before a storm. People stepped back instinctively, making space. Phones were lowered, then raised again. The crowd, once loose and lazy, now tightened like a drawstring, forming a perimeter around a new center, Norman Keegan, and the men approaching him. The protester turned at last, sensing something shifting behind him. He stopped pacing. His eyes tracked the uniforms, and for the first time, his face faltered. His jaw moved, trying to find its footing. The fire behind him popped again, casting sparks into the air between him and the Marines. The lead Marine, Staff Sergeant Harlow, reached the edge of the bench. He removed his cover. In one smooth, reverent motion, he lowered himself to one knee beside the fire barrel. His gloved hand reached into the coals. No hesitation, no flinch, and pulled free the largest surviving piece of the burned jacket. It was hardly more than a sleeve and a corner of the chest. The patch had melted, the fabric blackened, edges curling. Smoke rose from it like incense from an altar.
He held it with both hands, and then, turning, Harlow stepped to Norman, who had not looked up once, not when they approached, not when the crowd moved, not even now. Harlow knelt once more, eyes level with the old Marine's. Their gazes met, for the first time. No salute, no words, just a nod, subtle, sharp. Norman blinked once. Harlow placed the cloth gently across Norman's lap, like laying a flag over a fallen friend. The scorched fabric hissed faintly as it met the cooler air.
Norman's hands remained still on the head of his cane, but his fingers tightened, just slightly, around the wood. The crowd was frozen. No voice, no flashbulbs, no coughing, only the hiss of the fire and the sound of 7 more sets of boots positioning themselves behind the bench. One by one, the Marines formed a line behind Norman. They stood at parade rest, arms clasped behind backs, eyes forward, as if awaiting orders that would never come. The square felt smaller now. The Protestor took a step back. Someone near the front whispered, "What are they doing?" And someone else, quietly, standing with him. The square had grown unnaturally quiet, as though the air itself had thickened, slowing every breath. The sounds of traffic, horns, brakes, distant voices, no longer reached inside the circle. It was as if the world had stopped just outside the curb. Norman remained seated, still, composed, his posture unchanged. The blackened cloth of the jacket lay across his lap like a folded flag, its edges curling inward as the last of the heat bled out. He didn't touch it. Behind him, the 8 Marines stood like stone, dress blues perfect, faces unreadable. They weren't posing, they weren't posturing, they were bearing witness. Staff Sergeant Harlow stepped back, rejoining the line with a slow, precise pivot. No one filled the silence he left behind. The Protestor stood a few paces away, now visibly unsure of himself. His chest still heaved from earlier adrenaline, but his arms had dropped to his sides. He stared at Norman, not with rage anymore, but with confusion, as though he'd expected the old man to break, and couldn't understand why he hadn't. No one came to support him. No one cheered. A few people in the crowd began to lower their phones, the impulse to record replaced by something else. Guilt, reverence, perhaps even shame. Their eyes lingered not on the fire, not on the confrontation, but on Norman, on the lines of his face, the stillness of his body, the silence that had refused to bow. To the side, a woman wiped her eye quietly. A man in a work vest took off his hat. The small child at the front edge, still clinging to his father's hand, whispered, "Why are the soldiers guarding him?" His father didn't answer right away. But then he knelt beside his son and murmured, "Because some men already gave everything." Norman finally moved, just a fraction. His right hand rose, not quickly, not ceremoniously, and brushed a small fleck of ash off the ruined sleeve in his lap. He smoothed it gently, as if to comfort it. That motion, simple and instinctive, rippled through the watching crowd like a wave. He did not need to say he had served. He did not need to name the places, the ranks, or the men he had buried. Everyone suddenly knew. Harlow's gaze remained on Norman. Their eyes met again, and for a long, solemn beat, nothing passed between them but recognition. No handshake, no salute, just 2 men who understood each other without a word. From the far left of the Marine line, one of the younger men, his boots still dusted with fresh parade ground soil, reached into his chest pocket. His fingers moved slowly. The movement drew no attention yet, not even from the crowd. But Norman saw, and his gaze did not shift. The Marine who had reached into his pocket now held something small in his hand, a folded rectangle of cloth, a campaign ribbon, frayed at one edge, its red, white, and green faded from sun and time. He didn't step forward. He didn't speak. He simply looked down at it, then up at Norman, then back to Staff Sergeant Harlow, as if silently asking permission to act. Harlow nodded once, barely. The younger Marine stepped forward, 2 steps, and placed the ribbon gently on the bench beside Norman, just touching the burned remains of the jacket. Still no words, still no music, just the soft weight of memory. Harlow cleared his throat, not loudly, not for attention, just enough to break the wall of silence around them. His voice came low, almost as if speaking to himself, but it carried. "When I was a kid," he said, "my father used to tell this story." He wasn't looking at Norman now. He was looking ahead, into the middle distance, eyes narrowed against the sunlight. His tone wasn't rehearsed. It came raw, from memory. Said there was a man in Vietnam, Hue City, 72, one of the worst firefights of the war. There were wounded everywhere, snipers, artillery, smoke so thick you couldn't see your own boots. People in the crowd leaned forward, not consciously, but drawn in by something more than curiosity. Harlow went on, slower now. He said there was this one Marine, didn't wait for orders, just went, pulled men out one at a time. No cover, no support, just carried them out, bleeding, screaming, unconscious. It didn't matter. His jaw tightened. His voice dropped a note. He got hit too. Took a round through the thigh. Kept going anyway. Said if you didn't stop him, he'd carry the whole damn unit out on his back. The protester didn't speak. He hadn't moved. Harlow turned now, finally looked directly at Norman. My father never said his name, just called him. A pause, a breath. The reason I came home. A hush settled again. Not the silence of confusion, but of realization. Norman didn't react, not visibly. He remained seated, hands still resting on his cane, the burned jacket across his lap, the campaign ribbon now beside it, returned to him like a lost relic. Another Marine stepped forward. A sergeant, older, maybe mid-40s, clean-shaven, eyes misted. He spoke softly, almost reverently. My dad served under you. Said you never talked much, but you always led from the front. Norman blinked once, slowly. His lips parted, not for words, but for breath. It was all still there. Every name, every face. A woman in the crowd gasped quietly. A man behind her murmured, That's him. I've read about that. More people began putting their phones away now. Not out of boredom, but respect. As if filming it felt wrong somehow. As if they were standing in a place that didn't belong to them. The protester took a small step backward. He opened his mouth, perhaps to argue, perhaps to defend himself, but no sound came. Only the flicker of recognition behind his eyes. For the first time he looked ashamed, and the man he had tried to humiliate sat still, honored not with noise but with silence. A strange feeling settled over the square, not quite silence, not quite sound, as if the air itself had grown dense with memory, with understanding, with something holy. Norman sat unmoving, his lap full of ashes and ribbon. Behind him the Marines did not shift. They didn't need to. Their presence was now part of the stone, as if they had always been there. The fire in the barrel had reduced to glowing coals. No more rage, just heat. And from the edge of the square a city official arrived. Not with fanfare or escort, but alone, eyes wide, breath short, clearly having been called in haste. He stepped forward cautiously, confusion on his face, until he saw the Marines. Then he saw Norman, and then he stopped. A long pause stretched before him, as if he realized this wasn't his moment to speak. He turned to the man beside him, one of the city groundskeepers, and whispered something under his breath. The groundskeeper nodded and left. From somewhere off to the side, a woman emerged. Not part of the crowd, a local councilwoman. She didn't speak either. She walked straight to the bench, stopping 2 paces short, and looked at Norman. Then she looked at the scorch marks on the wood. And then, with her voice low and steady, she said, This bench will bear his name. No one clapped, no one cheered, but something shifted. Within minutes, a temporary bronze plaque, carried by the groundskeeper, was placed beside the bench. Not drilled in yet, just resting there for now. It read, "Keegan's Corner, for those who served silently." Norman didn't acknowledge it, but he didn't have to. Someone stepped forward from the crowd, an older man in a denim jacket. He removed a small American flag from his pocket, the kind often used on Memorial Day gravestones, and gently wedged it between the bench slats. Others followed. A young woman placed a white flower on the armrest. A teenager stepped forward, face red with shame, and set a folded note beside the burned fabric. He said nothing, but his hands trembled as he placed it down. The protester still stood near the fire barrel, but now he looked smaller. Not physically. Something in his posture had deflated, like the weight of his own voice had finally settled on his shoulders. He didn't run. He didn't lash out again. He simply looked down, at the bench, at the plaque, at the cloth, and stepped backward, melting into the edge of the crowd. A woman offered Norman a jacket, a gift, folded neatly in her hands. Not military issue, not a replacement. Just something warm, clean, respectful. Norman looked at it, then placed it beside him without a word. The sky above had shifted to a deep gold now, the sun dipping toward the horizon. Long shadows fell across the brick walkway, the statue, the bench, but none were longer than the one cast by the man who hadn't said a word in over an hour, and had spoken more than any of them. A week had passed. The morning light once again poured across the town square in pale gold, catching on storefront windows and iron lampposts, brushing the tops of hedges that lined the brick walkway. And the bench was no longer just a bench. Its wood had been sanded, restained. The scorched end replaced with care by the city's maintenance crew who worked late after hours, unbilled, unpaid. The plaque had been mounted properly now, bolted into permanence, the letters etched deeper than before. Keegan's Corner, for those who served silently. There were no flowers today, no crowd, just Norman Keegan, sitting exactly as he always had. Same time, same spot. His boots were shined, not glossy, just clean. Black leather, cracked but cared for. The laces were even, tight, military tight. Beside him sat the new jacket, the one offered to him days earlier, still folded neatly, untouched. He didn't wear it. He didn't need to. It was not a replacement. It was a gesture. And gestures, Norman believed, lived best in stillness. A soft breeze carried the sound of flags snapping on the pole across the square. The same pole he had saluted quietly every morning for over 20 years. The burned fabric was gone now, buried privately 2 days after the incident, folded by the hands of the honor guard, placed in a wooden box. No ceremony, just 3 Marines, a shovel, and silence. Across the square, life had resumed. The bakery opened. The newspaper cart rolled into place. Children passed on scooters, shouting and laughing. But something was different. Every Marine who passed the square now paused. Not long, just a second, a touch of the hand to the bench as they walked by. A quiet, instinctive salute to what it had become. Even the local garbage collector, a man no one ever noticed, stopped his route by 5 seconds each morning to nod toward Keegan's Corner, hand to heart. And then there was the protester. He didn't wear black now. He wore a pale gray work shirt, sleeves rolled up, arms smudged with paint and dust. He had begun volunteering at the local Veterans of Foreign Wars post 3 days earlier. No one asked him to. No one instructed him. He just showed up. Today he passed through the square like everyone else. And as he reached the bench, he paused, reached into his breast pocket, removed a small flag pin, the kind given at parades, and gently placed it on the edge of the plaque. He didn't speak. Norman didn't look at him. But the young man nodded, stepped away, and disappeared into the morning. Norman sat alone again. But it wasn't the same kind of alone. It wasn't forgotten. It wasn't dismissed. It was revered. The wind picked up slightly, curling around the bench, brushing the sleeve of his shirt, lifting the edge of the folded jacket beside him. He looked forward, not down, not back, just forward. If stories like this resonate with your heart, Like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you are watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.